Today's learning sponsors, a lot of them are the same, but they have one or two new ones. Year of Learning, Sue and Ann Arnie Garelick, in memory of Malka Pearl Mann and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Pearl Rosner bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shall share her children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Rav Shimon. Sharon and Fred Liska, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov. Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, and Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, Chana bas Yeshaya. Friends of Toby Peres, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi. We have a month of learning by Carol and Josh Sanborn in memory of her mother Yita bat Nachman ben Yaman, Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his brother Yaakov ben Avraham, Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of his father David ben Fishel Halevi and her mother Bela bas Avraham, as well as a month of learning by Stephanie and Fred Mortman for the refuah shlema of her daughter Mazal bat Sarah Malka. We also today, the 16th, have a day of learning by Tamar and Milton Fishberger in memory of her father Moshe ben Meir. May the Shemas have an aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yeshir Hashem Ataliah, L'chol b'nei Yisrael, a good gebench shtia.
Amen.
So if we go to our Gemara and pick up more or less where we left off, we see we're still dealing with the issues pertaining to the status of the Mishtaleach, the scapegoat, right? So I want to just go back a little bit on 66a, right? Ela Amar Rava, says Rava, Gzera Mishum Takala. Okay, that's where we sort of left off. That Rava's explanation was that the rabbis did make a decree, okay, regarding the bull and goat of Yom Kippur, that they could not be more than a year old, right? And remember, we saw previously a difference of opinion between what the Rebbe said was a year. He used 365 solar days versus Chazal, who disagreed, saying it was basically going to be a time period of 12 months from day to day, okay? So given that situation, Rava then said, maybe they made this decree because of perhaps of a mishap, problem, right? And that one should not, at the time when there's no Beis HaMikdash, one can't consecrate objects, you make an evaluation of objects for the temple treasury, or use them, okay, for other dedicated purposes. Okay. So as we continue now in the Gemara, right, we are okay. Down, right? We're about ve'im hekdesh v'harich v'achrim behema, right? That's about 9 lines down from the top of the Amud. Okay. Ve'im hekdesh v'harich v'hacharim. What happens if one went ahead, okay, in this time when there is no Beis HaMikdash, and dedicated or evaluated, right? Behema, an animal, te'aker, right? It has to be uprooted. In other words, it has to be changed. Perot, ksut, v'kelim. And if he did so, let's say for any kind of agricultural products or garments or any utensils, yirkavu, he should put them aside until and allow them to rot. Ma'ot uklei matachot, or if he had coins, or he had metal items, metal vessels, yolich hana'ah liyam hamelech. He should direct any benefit that he has as if he's put it into the Dead Sea. In other words, he doesn't dafka have to put it into the Yam HaMelech itself, but he transfers the value of that item, okay, onto other monies and tosses it into the drink, so to speak. Hu ikur. What do we mean when we say we uproot it? Noel delet lefaneha vehi meita me'aleha. That they put the animal, as I said, we talked earlier, into some sort of a pen, into a closed area, lock it, and the animal dies on its own from hunger. Now, so the Gemara asks here, kalam demai, what kind of mishap is it such that the rabbis would make such a good, right? Itikala da hakrava. If we're going to say it's a mishap regarding the status of bringing an offering, right? You might have the wrong age or the wrong time or things like that. Afilu kol re'iyot nami. If that's the case, then that should apply to right, all animals that were left out to graze. That they're too, not just those ones that were inappropriately, let's say, consecrated, valued, or dedicated. Itkala de giza va'avoda. If we're talking about a mishap where someone might accidentally shear the animal or work the animal, afilu kol re'iyot nami. Here too, we might argue that it should apply to any other animal that was put out to pasture. And so the Gemara comes back and clarifies. Le'olam tikala dehakrava. No, what we're clearly talking about here is a mishap with regards to the sacrificial status. V'hanach delav b'nei hakravaninu. But after all, if these animals were put in a pen cage, right, and they were not considered valid for offering, we had the opinion, at least one that we saw, where an animal that's been put off for an offering is clearly put off forever. Okay? So isn't that applicable here? So the Gemara tells us, lo tireid baho. Okay? In other words, the reason is that if he's put the animal aside, it's like he's no longer concerned about it. Right? Hach debat hakravahi. Okay, but regarding the bull and the goat that are part of the Yom Kippur process, tareid be. He is concerned about it. He is preoccupied with it. Okay? So therefore, that means that one is concerned about the fact that he may forget that, let's say, the animal was an inappropriate age and go ahead and offer it in any case. So the Gemara continues, V'takala atzma tana'ahi. And this issue of a mishap, in and of itself, it's a machloket tanaim. The Tanya Chada, because according to one Braita, Pesach shelo karav barishon, an animal designated as a korban Pesach, and for whatever reason, it was not able to be offered on the 14th of Nisan, the first Pesach, Yikrav b'sheni, give it over to somebody, since the animal was already designated as a korban Pesach. Well, find somebody who was tameh on that date, and by the time of Pesach Sheni, they're going to be tahor. Give the animal to that person, and let him offer it on Pesach Sheni. B'sheni, and if it was a situation of the second Pesach, Yikrav l'shana haba'ah. Well, if for some reason the person, who, let's say, could not offer it on second Pesach, right? What happens then? Hold it over till the next year. Vatanya idach. However, another Braita teaches, lo yikrav, that one cannot offer it. My love, what's the reason not? But tekala pligi, isn't it not because they disagree about a mishap, possible error, right? Isn't that the case? Lo, no, says the Gemara. The kuli alma lo chayshinim latakala. No, everybody is in agreement, okay, that it's possible that they may concur on a situation of potential mishap. V'hacha b'plugta de Rabbi v'Rabbanan kamiflagei. And really what they're arguing about is the machloket between Rebbe and the rabbis. V'lo kasha. And that's not necessarily a difficulty. Because in one case we could say the Braita, all right, that says give it over to second Pesach or the following year. Rebbe, that could be Rebbe's view, that maybe that animal, okay, is not invalid age-wise. Rabbanan. And in the other Braita, where it says you can't slaughter it whatsoever, that would be the view of the rabbis. Okay? V'hatanya, says the Gemara. V'chein hama'ot. But aren't we taught in another Braita that the issue applies also to other things besides animals? For example, what about money? Elalav shmamina, but tekala pligi shmamina. Therefore, doesn't it imply that clearly they're dealing with an issue of mishap? And therefore, that is what we learn from this. Okay? That concludes that particular discussion. So in our new Mishnah now, as we continue, we go on with aspects of the Yom Kippur service. And we see the following. Balo, the Kohen Gadol, Eitzel Seir HaMishtaleach. He approaches the potential scapegoat. Or let's say it's the one that he completed the lottery on, and he knows for sure that this is the animal that's going to be delegated to the wilderness, right? V'somech shtei yadav alav, and he puts his two hands on it. Umitvadeh, and he makes a confession. V'kach haya omer, and this would appear to be the language of the confession. Ana Hashem, please, O God. Chat'u, they sinned. Avu, they did wrong. Pash'u, they committed, again, sins, rebellion. Lefanecha, Amcha Beit Yisrael, your people, the house of Israel. And there is actually going to be a question about the lashon here of this confession.
Mm-hmm.
Ana Hashem, please Hashem, kaperna l'chataim v'la'avanot v'la'psha'im shechatu. Grant atonement to the sins and the errors and the misdeeds, right, that they sin. V'sha'avu v'shapashu lefanecha amcha beit Yisrael. Right, the wrongs, the rebellions, all done before you, people, the house of Israel. Kakatu b'Torat Moshe avdecha lemor, as written, okay, in the Torah of your servant Moses, ki bayom hazeh yichaper aleichem, l'taher etchem mikol chatotechem, l'fnei Hashem titharu. For on this day of atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you from all your sins. Before the Lord you shall be purified. Okay? Now, notice a couple things. First of all, it says, Amcha Beit Yisrael. Is there something significant about that lashon, that language, that we need to be sensitive to? Second of all, the Mishnah continues and tells us, V'hakohanim v'ha'am ha'omdim ba'azara, the priests and the nation that are standing there out in the courtyard. K'shahayu shomim et shem mefarash, when they heard the divine name, the explicit divine name, shehu yotzei mipi kohen gadol, that was stated from the mouth of the kohen gadol. Hayu korim, they would bow, umishtachavim, and they would fall, prostrate themselves, v'noflim al pneihem, and on their faces. V'omrim, and they would say, Baruch Shem Malchuto Le'olam Ba'ed. Blessed is the name of glorious King forever and ever. Okay? Misaro Lami Shaya Molicho. Then the Kohen Gadol would hand the pass, the right, to whoever is going to lead it out, right? Hakol ksherin laholicho, and all are valid to lead it out. Ela sha'asu hakohanim gedolim keva, but rather the high priest made I'm going to call it an established practice. V'lo hayu manichim et Yisrael laholicho. And they did not permit an Israelite to take him out. Now, Erwin, you there? Erwin, where are you?
I don't think I thought he said he was leaving, didn't he?
Maybe. All right, so Erwin mentioned to me yesterday that he had learned previously that the person who took out the mishtaleach usually wound up dying within a year. And Koren has an interesting note here, just to share it. According to the Midrash, the individual who escorted the goat would die within a year. For this reason, the priests led the goat themselves to avoid causing tragedy to others. Tosafot Chadashim. Okay? So I didn't know Erwin wouldn't be here for that comment, but let's say we said it with him in mind, okay?
Does that mean that the Kohen did not die?
I don't know. Good question, Zev. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Maaseh v'holicho arsala. So Rabbi Yossi tells us a little story here. There was an incident where a person by the name of Arsala, right, V'Yisrael Haya, who was an Israelite, and he led the goat. V'keves asulo, and what did they do? They built a ramp for him to lead the goat out from the temple area, out, right? Mipnei habavliim, because of the Babylonians, shahayu metalshim b'sa'aro, that they used to pluck the hairs of the goat, v'omrim lo, and say, tov v'tzei, tov v'tzei. In other words, here, take my sin, and I'll replace it with one of your hairs and go out, so on and so forth. Right?
What
Now,
does Arsalan have to do with the Babylonians? I don't see a connection.
hold on, we're going to see. Good question. The Gemara is going to deal with that. All right? Gemara says, Ve'elu b'nei Aharon im am kadoshecha. But what about the fact that we have a pasuk that tells us that the Kohanim are your holy nation, right? They're part of the Jewish people. So how is it that we had this confession in the Mishnah tell us, Amcha Beit Yisrael? Did it include the Kohanim or not? Right? That's part of our question. If, according to another pasuk, they are included, then they should not need to be mentioned in another confessional. If they're not included, then why aren't they included in this confessional? Why do they have to be included separately in a second confessional? Okay? So let's pick up now that we understand what the Gemara is trying to ask us. Lo ka'amar, they were not recited, they were not mentioned. Mantana, then according to whose language is this confessional phrased? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, says Rabbi Yirmiyah, Delo ka Rabbi Yehuda. It can't be according to the view of Rabbi Yehuda, De'ika Rabbi Yehuda, because if it were according to the Rabbi Yehuda, Ha'amar, wasn't he the one who said, Yesh lehem kapara b'sa'ir hamishtaleach, that the Kohanim also have atonement through the scapegoat, right? So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, they are included as part of Amcha Beit Yisrael, right? So what happens? Abaye Amar, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yehuda. You might even say that this language, of the language of this confessional, could be according to the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Atu Kohanim, Lav B'Klal Amcha Yisrael Minhu. Isn't it possible to say then, right, that the Kohanim are included? I'm phrasing it in the positive as opposed to the question, as if to say, at what point do we say that the Kohanim are not included in the phrase, your people, the house of Israel? So the Gemara then tells us, okay? So the answer we have here is actually that there are another version of this same confession that doesn't say Amcha Beit Yisrael. Okay? That it simply may say Lefanecha Beit Yisrael. Okay? Now, our Gemara goes on though. Misaro Lemisha Molicho. Okay? They passed it on to the one that would lead it out. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, Ish, right? To the person, man, lahachshir et hazar. Okay? That permits somebody who is a non-Kohen. Et. Okay? What does it mean, the fact that the pasuk then says, right? It means that he's the person that is appointed to lead it out. So why, as we go to the next Amud, is that word important? Sheyehe mezuman, that he's designated in advance. Et, also appointed. Ba'afilu b'Shabbat. Maybe that applies to the appointed time. When it's Shabbat, he has to lead out the animal. Okay? Et, va'afilu b'tumah. Maybe that also tells us that because it's associated with an appointed time, even if he is tameh, or even if the animal becomes tameh, you still bring it out and lead it, right? Now, what happens? The Gemara continues and tells us, Ish, when it said Ish, lahachshir et hazar. A Braita tells us that clearly comes to tell us that it may be a non-Kohen.
Shita.
That's obvious. Mahu detema. So what are you trying to tell us? Kapara kativa be kamashmalan. Okay? It comes to tell us that atonement is also part of that, let's say, process, part of that element. And that's indeed what it tells us. Okay? That atonement for the Kohanim is also included in the Mishtaleach, in the goat that's sent to Azalzel.
How do you get that?
How do I get it? Because it says E.T. He's appointed. But it also said if it says Amcha, you had the question of the verse,
Right.
right? So if you say Beit Yisrael, clearly, right, you're going to include the Kohanim. So in any case, you're darshaning the fact that because it includes a non-Kohen, certainly it should be able to include a Kohen, because all of the other avoda has to be done by a Kohen,
Oh, right.
right? Okay.
Okay.
Now, E.T., the Braita tells us, we said it meant appointed, va'afilu b'Shabbat, even on Shabbos, l'mai hilchata, what then is the law? Amar Rav Sheshet, according to Rav Sheshet, lomar she'im haya choleh, markivo al ktefo, tells us that if the animal was ill, right, if the goat couldn't travel, what happens? Well, he has to carry the goat on his shoulders, which seems to imply that he could go beyond the Tchum Shabbat from Jerusalem to bring the goat to the cliff, which clearly tells us that Tchum Shabbat is a rabbinic decree and not a doraita.
Right.
Okay? So now going on, Kiman, according to whom? Delo Rabbi Natan. It can't be according to the view of Rabbi Nassim. De'i Rabbi Natan, because were it according to the view of a Rabbi Natan, who says, Chai no seyat atzmo, that a living item carries itself. Afilu tema Rabbi Natan, chalashani. We might say, however, that in this case, Rabbi Nassim would make an exception and say if the animal becomes sick, okay, it's unique and therefore it may be carried in this situation. Okay? Does that mean that the Kohen or the Israelite who carries it is over on Tchum Shabbos? Okay? That is still the question, right? We don't have a clear answer unless it's an example where the animal is ill. Now, Amar Rafram, says Rafram, Zot omeret, Eruv v'hotza'ah l'Shabbat. That seems to tell us, according to Rav Afram, right, that in regards to the whole practice of an Eruv, or carrying beyond, right, on Shabbat, ve'ein Eruv v'hotza'ah l'Yom HaKippurim, that may apply only to Shabbat and does not apply whatsoever to Yom Kippur. But generally we're of the impression, right, that Yom Kippur and Shabbat have the same halachas. Let's see what happens, says the Gemara. Right? Et, we have the fact again that it said appointed time. Va'afilu b'tumah, even if it's impurity. Lemai hilchata. So according to whom is the law? Amar Rav Sheshet, he says, Lomar she'im nitma mishalcho that if the person who had been designated to bring the animal out, nechnas tamei la'azara u'mishalcho. Again, an exception that he is permitted, excuse me, to enter the temple precinct, even though he's tamei, and then lead the animal out. So let's clarify that further as we go on, right? Now with the following. Sha'alu et Rabbi Eliezer. So the students asked Rabbi Eliezer, Chala mahu sheyakivehu al ktefo. You're saying that if the animal is ill, right, that the person is to carry it on his shoulders? Is that really the case? Amar lehem, and he said, responded to them, Yachol hu laharkiv ani va'atem. He says, it's possible that you or I could, or you, plural, okay, or I could carry it out. Now, the question is, what kind of an answer is that? Why did Rabbi Eliezer answer that way? Chala mishalcho. However, he goes on to tell them, if the designated person was ill, mahu sheyishalchenu biyad acher, said the students, does it mean that they will send him by means of somebody
else.
Amar lehem, ehe b'shalom ani va'atem. Basically, it should be peace between you and me, or you and I. Okay, in other words, as if to say that wouldn't happen. Okay? So we have a problem here already that Rabbi Eliezer, who's Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, also known as Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, seems to either be avoiding the questions he's asked or give them inappropriate answers. Okay? So the Gemara is going to continue now and try to bring other examples in this situation and clarify what is Rabbi Eliezer doing. Dechafo v'lo meit, says the students asking. Okay? What happens if he gets to the cliff and the person, whether Israelite or Kohen, pushes the animal off the cliff, but it doesn't die? Mahu sheyared acharav v'yamitenu. Should that individual then go down and put to death the goat? Amar lehem, he says to them, Kain yavdu kol oivecha Hashem. Okay, so he tells them, so may all your enemies perish. The Chachamim Omrim, the sages say, okay, the following. Chala, if the animal is ill, Markivo al ktefo, he carries him on his shoulders. Chala mishalcho, if the person designated, Yishalchenu biyad acher, he should be sent by somebody else. Dechafo v'lo met. Okay, if he pushed him off and he didn't die, the animal, Yered acharav v'yamitenu, that he does go down and follows it and kills it. So the Chachamim have very clear answers. Rabbi Eliezer, again,
Does it have to be a ritual shahita?
Wishy-washy answer. What, Steve?
Does it have to be a ritual slaughter?
Okay, let's go on in the Gemara and we'll see if it deals with it and answers your question. Shalu at Rabbi Eliezer, again, these students are very, right? Ploni, mahu olam haba. Okay. Okay, what's the fate of that person? I'm assuming, okay, that it's the Mishal Chol. Amar lehem, he said to them, Rabbi Eliezer, Lo sha'altuni ella al ploni. He says, how do you know? I mean, you've only asked me about that person. How do we know about any person? So the Gemara continues. Mahu lahatzil ro'eh kivseh min ha'ari. Okay, what about in a different example? Say about how a shepherd might save a lamb from a lion. Amar lehem, he gave an answer. Lo she'iltuni ela al hakivsa. You only asked me about the animal, okay, the ewe. Mahu lahatzil haro'eh min ha'ari. What about they asked him saving the shepherd himself from the lion? Amar lehem, lo she'iltuni ela al haro'eh. You only asked me about the shepherd. Okay? In other words, how do we know any person? Mamzer mahu le'reish. Ask him again. What about the status of a individual who was born in a inappropriate marriage situation? Is he permitted to become a inheritor? Mahu li'abeh. What about the ibum? Mahu lisud et beito. What about the fact of, let's say, plastering one's house after the destruction of the temple? Right? Mahu lisud et kivro. What about plastering one's grave? Now, the Gemara tells us, Lo mipnei shehifli gan b'dvarim. It's not because Rabbi Eliezer disagreed, okay, with their questions or the statements of the rabbis. Ela mipnei shelo amar davar shelo shama mipi rabo meolam. But rather, Rabbi Eliezer had the practice that he would never teach or say something unless he had learned it directly from his teacher.
Sure.
Now, his main teacher was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, okay? And therefore he held him in such esteem that he would never teach anything except coming from him. So the Gemara then tells us the following incident, okay? Since he didn't have a Masorah from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he did not feel competent to answer a question otherwise. Okay? Now, another scenario. Sha'ala isha chachama et Rabbi Eliezer. A particularly wise woman asks Rabbi Eliezer the following shaila. Mi'achar shema'aseh ha'egel shavin. Okay? Since the sin of the egel, right? The egel hazahav, the golden calf, was incumbent on almost the entire population of the people. Mipnei ma ein mitatan shaveh. Why was it that their deaths were not all the same? Amarla. In other words, some, remember, died from a plague. Some died because they were killed by the Levi'im. Okay. Others had some sort of illness. Why wasn't all their death the same? Amarla. And his answer to her was, Ein chachma le'isha ela befelech. There's no wisdom in a woman except in how to use a spindle. V'chein hu omer, and thus he said, V'chol isha chachmat lev biyadeha tavu. That the wisdom of a woman, that a woman either who's wise, who's smart, okay, she knows how to spin with her hands. In other words, is it appropriate for you as a woman to ask such a question? Right? Itmar. And about this situation, the following was told. Rav v'Levi. Rav and Levi had a machloket as Amoraim. Chad Amar, one of them said, Zibach b'kiter b'sayif. There were those people who sacrificed, they burned incense to the Egel, and therefore they died by the sword. Kipech v'nishek. There were those individuals who sort of embraced and kissed the Egel. B'mita, they died, okay, through another means. Okay, samach bilvavo, and there were others who simply rejoiced inwardly, behidrakon, and they died through a stomach ailment. V'chadamar, and the other one said, edim v'hatra'a. It's an issue of witnesses, okay, and warning. B'sayif, they died by means of being punished with the sword. The Levites. Edim below hatra'a, witnesses but without warning. B'mita, they died basically by a plague. Lo edim below hatra'a, and those that did not have either a witness or a warning, behidrakan, they were the ones who died by the intestinal illness. Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda now, Shifto shel Levi lo avad avodah zara. The tribe of Levi did not engage in the worship of. You seem to have raised the question that everybody was guilty of worshiping the Egel Zahav. What about the tribe of Levi? They were not guilty, right? Why? Because we have a pasuk that says, "V'yamod Moshe b'shar hamachaneh v'chulei," that Moses stood at the front, the gate of the camp. Remember, he says, "Mila Hashem Elai," who is for Hashem, gather with me, and all of the tribe of Levi gathered with him, right? Yativ Ravina v'ka'amar lahashma'ata. Ravina sat, and he related this halacha. Etivei b'nei Rav Papa bar Abba l'Ravina, and he was challenged with by the sons of Rav Papa, okay, the son of Rabina. Ha'omer la'aviv le'imo lo re'etiv. What about the fact that we have a pasuk who said, okay, who is father and mother, I've not seen him. In other words, he doesn't acknowledge, okay, the relationship with his siblings, right? That maybe that implies that some of the tribe of Levi did become involved in idol worship, and they were killed by other members of the tribe of Levi. So Ravina answers, Aviv avi imo miYisrael. We're talking there about his father, okay, but his mother's father. Echav, okay, his brothers. Echav me'imo miYisrael. Okay, there it's only his half brothers. Banav b'nei bito miYisrael. Sons, there we're talking about the daughter's sons from Israelites. Okay? In fact, therefore, Ravina's argument is that none of the tribe of Levi were involved in the worship of the golden calf. Okay? We continue, V'keves asulo. Remember, they said they built a ramp for him to bring out the goat. Right? Amar Rabba bar Barchana, and Rabba bar Barchana explained and commented on the Mishnah. Lo Bavliim hayu. They weren't really Babylonians. Ella Alexandriim hayu. But really they were from Alexandria, Jews. Umitoch shesonim et Bavliim. And since the sages in Israel disliked, I don't want to use the word hate, okay? That's pretty strong. Disliked the Babylonians. Hayu korin otan al shman. And therefore, that's why they called these Alexandrians from Egypt Babylonians. I'll come back to that shortly. Tanya, and we have a brighter Rabbi Yehuda Omer. He says, Lo Bavliim hayu, ela Alexandriim hayu. They weren't Babylonians, says Rabbi Yehuda in a brighter. They were from Alexandria, Egypt. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says to him then, Tanuach da'atcha shehinachta et da'ati. Says Rabbi Yossi, whose family originally came from Babylonia, basically says, may your mind be at rest since you've made my mind at rest. Now, the whole issue was that these individuals would pluck hairs from the goat, and instead it's as if they were transferring their sins onto the animal directly. Right? Tov v'tzei, it said. They said, take out sin and go. Tana, and the Braita teaches, Ma shahai tzepira din v'chovei dera sagi'im. Okay? So what is it that this animal, that this goat, should remain here, right? And, okay, and the sins of the generation, okay, not be carried out and left, right? So that's the point. That the goat, therefore, the sooner we get the goat out, the better. Okay. Now, the Mishnah, new Mishnah, basically, we'll go into this a little bit. Miyekirei Yerushalayim, the prominent people of Jerusalem, Hayu melavin oto ad sukkah harishona. They would accompany this mishtaleach, the person leading the goat, up till the first, our text says sukkah, the first rest stop. I'll call it that for the moment, okay? Eser Sukkot Mirushalayim va'ad Suk. And there were 10 rest stops, okay, between Jerusalem and the cliff. Okay? The implication seems to be that at least at that time they had a pretty fair idea where the cliff was. And in actuality, even some guides in Israel today claim they know that location, by the way. Now, what happens? Tish'im Ris, the distance, okay, from Jerusalem to the cliff, okay, was 90 Ris. Right? A Ris is about, it's more than usually the Shabbos Tchum. Okay, Shiv'a umechze lekol meal. It's 7.5 for each meal. So it was a distance of 12 meal. Al kol sukkah v'sukkah umrim lo. At each rest stop, we'll call it, they said to him, Harei mazon v'harei mayim. Here there's food and here there's water. And somebody should ask the question, right? If it's Yom Kippur, what was he doing taking water and taking food? Right? Umelavino tomi sukkah lesukkah. And they would escort him from one rest stop to another rest stop. Chutz me'acharon, with the exception of the last one. Now, it could be the last person or the last booth, last rest stop. Shebahen, okay, the last of them. So that's why I understood it to be the last rest stop. She'eino magia imo latzuk. That he doesn't go, that anyone who is escorting him does not go to the cliff. Right? We're on 67a just a little bit. Ela omeid mirachok v'ro'eh et ma'asav. But he stands a bit of a distance away and he observes what is going on. And just to finish the Mishnah, now Ma haya oseh, what did the designated individual do? Cholek lashon shel zehorit. He would divide up a long, let's say, strip of crimson, right, in half. Chetzio kashur basela, part of it he would tie to a rock, right? V'chetzio kashur bein shnei karnav, and part of it he would tie around the horns of the goat. Udechafo la'acharav, and he would push the goat backwards. V'hu mitgalgel v'yored, and it would roll down, right, and go down. V'lo haya magia lechatzi hahar, and it did not even reach halfway down the mountainside, ad shene'asa evarim avarim, until it began to be torn apart limb by limb. Bav yashav lo tachat sukkah achrona ad shetechshach, and therefore the person then came back and waited at what had been the last rest stop until dark. Umematay mitame begadim, right? And at what point are his garments still impure? Mishayatza chutz lechomat Yerushalayim. According to one view, it was once he exited the wall of Jerusalem. Rabbi Shimon Omer, but Rabbi Shimon says, Mishat Techiyato Latzuk, from the time that he pushes the goat off the cliff. Right? And we'll stop there. Tomorrow we'll pick up